welcome to our deep dive today.
Oh, it's good to be here.
We're taking a closer look at the book of Genesis,
Okay.
specifically from a Christian perspective.
That sounds good.
You've given us a really interesting mix of material.
Mm-hmm.
Excerpts from Genesis itself,
Okay.
analyses of the creation story,
Right.
and even some reflections on how it connects to bigger theological ideas.
Yeah, Genesis is truly the foundation
Oh, yeah.
for so much of Christian belief.
Yeah.
It's a book that has sparked countless debates and inspired
Oh, absolutely.
generations of theologians.
For sure.
Today, we're going to try to synthesize the key takeaways
Okay.
from your sources and see what unique insights we can uncover together.
I love that.
Yeah,
It feels like we're about to embark on a theological treasure hunt.
I like it.
And speaking of uncovering things,
Okay.
one of the first things that struck me as I was going through these sources was the debate around the creation account.
Right.
Some lean towards a literal interpretation of the 7 days,
Yeah,
while others see it as more metaphorical.
sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
That's a question.
Yeah.
That has intrigued Christians for centuries.
bet.
Some argue that the 7 days of creation should be understood
Mm-hmm.
as literal 24-hour periods.
Right.
Others, however, see the number 7 as symbolic,
Okay.
pointing to a deeper meaning.
Interesting.
They might compare Genesis 1 to the poetic language
Uh-huh.
found in prologues like John 1.
Okay.
After all, the Bible often uses numbers symbolically.
It's true.
Yeah,
7 is often associated with completeness or perfection in the Bible.
right.
And there's that fascinating detail about light
Yeah,
being created before the sun.
right.
Some people use that to argue for a literal interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
saying it shows a different order of creation than what science suggests.
Okay.
But others see light as a metaphor
Uh-huh.
for something else like God's presence or spiritual illumination.
Sure.
What do you make of that?
That's a great example of
Yeah.
how a single verse can spark such different interpretations.
It's true.
I think it's crucial to remember that Genesis isn't trying to be a science textbook.
Okay.
It's using poetic imagery
Right.
to communicate profound truths about God and his creation.
Okay.
The idea of light existing before the sun could be a way
Mm,
of emphasizing that God is the ultimate source
right.
of all light, both physical and spiritual.
Oh, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah,
That actually makes a lot of sense.
good.
It shifts the focus from trying to reconcile the text with modern science
Yeah,
to understanding the deeper theological message.
exactly.
Yeah.
And if we look at how light is used throughout the Bible,
Uh-huh.
we see that it often has
Okay.
both literal and figurative meanings.
Right.
Think about how Jesus is called the light of the world in the Gospel of John.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this potential for a more symbolic understanding of the creation account.
Right.
But what about Adam and Eve?
Okay.
Some of the sources you provided really challenge the traditional view
Uh-huh.
of them being the first biological humans.
Okay.
They suggest there might have been others.
Right.
What a fascinating idea.
Yeah,
It definitely makes you rethink the whole story, doesn't it?
it does.
Yeah.
One way to reconcile the scientific evidence with the biblical narrative
Okay.
is to consider Adam and Eve as recent common ancestors to all humanity.
Okay.
This means that other humans may have existed,
Mm-hmm.
but God chose Adam and Eve to enter into a unique covenant relationship with him,
Okay.
bestowing his image upon them and their lineage.
Okay. I'm following you so far.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, one question popped into my head when I read that.
Okay.
What about Cain's wife?
Right?
Where did she come from? If Adam and Eve were the only humans.
Sure.
I bet our listeners wondering the same thing.
That's a classic question.
It is.
This model suggests that non-Adamic humans could have existed
Oof.
alongside Adam and Eve's lineage,
Right.
eventually intermingling.
Okay.
It sheds light on verses about Cain fearing others after being exiled
Uh-huh.
and his ability to build a city. If
Yeah.
there were no other humans,
Yeah.
who would he be afraid of?
Exactly.
Like, who would live in his city?
That's such an interesting point.
Yeah.
It brings a whole new dimension to the story.
Right.
So we've got this idea of Adam and Eve as the starting point for a special spiritual lineage within humanity.
Okay.
And that brings us to another big theme that comes up in these sources.
Uh-huh.
Humans being created in God's image.
Right?
What does that actually mean?
Sure.
And how does it connect to the concept of original sin,
Okay.
which is also a big focus in these sources?
The image of God is a profound concept
Yes.
that has been debated for centuries.
I can imagine.
Some believe it refers to humans having a capacity for reason,
Mm-hmm.
creativity, and love qualities that reflect God's nature.
Yeah.
Others emphasize the relational aspect, suggesting that God's image is propagated
Okay.
through spiritually formative relationships, like the relationship between a father and child.
So if God's image can be passed on relationally,
Yeah.
what does that mean for our understanding of Adam and Eve's sin being passed down to all of humanity?
Right.
If there were other humans, did they inherit this original sin as well?
That's a really insightful question.
Is it?
And it leads us to the heart of the matter.
Okay.
Original sin is often understood as both a state of separation from God and a tendency towards evil that has been inherent in humanity since the fall.
Okay.
Even if there were other humans who weren't directly descended from Adam and Eve,
Right.
this broken relationship with God would have impacted all of creation and the human experience.
That makes me think about how sin isn't just about individual actions, but also about a brokenness that affects us all on a deeper level. It's like a ripple effect that spreads throughout humanity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's this brokenness that ultimately requires redemption through Jesus Christ.
Okay.
Through his sacrifice, we have the opportunity to be restored to a right relationship with God.
That's a powerful reminder of the hope that's woven into the Genesis narrative.
Yeah.
Even in the midst of the fall, we see glimpses of God's grace and his plan for redemption. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves,
Okay.
let's address another debate that came up in the sources.
Okay.
Noah's flood.
Right?
Was it a local event or did it encompass the entire globe?
Yes. The Great Flood debate.
I know, right?
Some argue for a global flood,
Okay.
pointing to the text's description of the waters covering the highest mountains.
Right.
Others, however, suggest it was a more localized event, perhaps catastrophic for the known world at that time, but not necessarily covering the entire planet.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's important to consider the historical context and the understanding of geography at the time.
Right.
We can't impose our modern worldview on an ancient text.
Exactly.
Right.
And those who favor a local flood often point to the descriptions of the animals on the ark.
Okay.
They argue it would have been impossible to fit every species
Uh-huh.
from around the world onto a single vessel.
Right.
Instead, they suggest that the ark carried representative animals
Okay.
from the region where Noah lived.
It's amazing how much there is to unpack in these stories.
It is.
But even with all these different interpretations,
Yeah.
one thing is clear.
What's that?
The book of Genesis is foundational to Christian belief.
Absolutely.
It sets the stage for the entire biblical narrative.
Right.
And I think that's where we should head next in our deep dive.
Sounds good. You're absolutely right. Genesis is like the overture to a grand symphony.
Yeah.
It introduces the key themes of creation, fall, and redemption that echo throughout the rest of Scripture. It's fascinating how these core ideas keep weaving in and out
Yeah.
of the biblical narrative, culminating in the person and work of Jesus Christ.
It's like we're given these musical themes right at the beginning,
Yeah.
and then we hear them developed and transformed as the symphony unfolds.
Exactly.
I love that analogy.
I like it.
But how does understanding these core themes,
Okay.
creation, fall, and redemption,
Sure.
shape our view of God,
Right.
humanity, and the world around us? What does it all mean for us today?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
Genesis isn't just an ancient text.
Right.
It speaks to our lives in profound ways.
Uh-huh.
For example, the creation account,
Okay.
even with all its debated interpretations,
Yeah.
points to the foundational truth that God is the creator.
Right.
He spoke everything into existence
Mhm.
and declared it good.
That's something that really struck me as I was reading through these sources.
Yeah.
The goodness of creation.
Uh-huh.
It's a powerful concept.
It is.
Especially in a world that often feels filled with so much brokenness and pain.
Right.
It challenges us to see the world, even with its imperfections,
Yeah.
as inherently valuable,
Absolutely.
something worth preserving and caring for.
And it's not just about preserving the natural world.
Right.
It's about recognizing the inherent dignity and worth
Mhm.
of every human being.
Of course.
After all, we're told in Genesis that we were created in God's image,
Yeah.
given dominion over the earth.
Yeah.
But what does that responsibility look like?
Yeah. What does it?
In a world that's often far from good.
That's a great question.
It is.
It makes me think about the concept of stewardship.
Okay.
Several of the sources highlighted how being made in God's image
Right.
isn't about domination or exploitation.
Sure.
It's about reflecting God's love and care for creation.
Yeah.
It's about being responsible and compassionate in how we interact with the world around us.
Precisely.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that we're not just consumers, but caretakers entrusted with the well-being of God's creation.
It's a big responsibility.
It is.
And it's easy to feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Especially when we consider the reality of sin, which is so deeply embedded in the human experience.
Right.
The story of Adam and Eve's fall is a stark reminder that we're all prone to make choices that break our relationship with God and with each other.
That's true.
Yeah.
Some sources even challenge the traditional interpretation of original sin,
Okay.
suggesting that Adam and Eve might not have been the first humans to sin.
Right.
But regardless of how we understand the specifics, the consequences of sin are undeniable.
Yeah.
Brokenness, suffering, and separation from God.
It's like a wound that affects us all.
Yeah.
A sense of being alienated from our true selves, from each other, and from God.
Yes, and it's a wound that requires healing.
Right.
That's where the hope woven into the Genesis narrative comes in.
Okay.
Even in the midst of the fall, we see God's grace and mercy at work.
Like how God provided clothing for Adam and Eve after their sin.
Exactly.
Or how he protected Cain even after he murdered Abel.
Those acts of grace foreshadow the ultimate act of redemption through Jesus Christ. He came to bridge the gap that sin had created to reconcile us to God and make us new creations.
So we're seeing how Genesis lays out this overarching narrative of God's plan for humanity and for all of creation. Right. It's a story of love rebellion and ultimately reconciliation.
Absolutely.
But it's not just a passive story that we read about.
No.
It's a story that invites us to participate, to align our lives with God's purposes and contribute to the restoration of all things.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Have I?
Genesis isn't just an ancient text to be studied.
Right.
It's a living story that speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart.
Okay.
It reminds us that we're not just products of chance or random evolution. We're created beings, made in the image of a loving God, with a purpose and a destiny far greater than ourselves.
And that purpose is tied to our relationship with God.
Yeah.
And our role as stewards of his creation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about being ambassadors of reconciliation, agents of grace and justice in a world that desperately needs them.
Wow.
And as we delve deeper into these sources, we're seeing how Genesis connects to broader theological ideas that have shaped Christian thought for centuries.
Right.
For example, one of the most significant themes that emerges is the concept of covenant.
Can you expand on that a bit?
Sure.
What does covenant mean in this context?
A covenant is a binding agreement between two parties. In the Bible, God establishes covenants with humanity, promising to bless and care for his creation. But these covenants also come with responsibilities, a call to live in obedience and faithfulness to God.
And we see this pattern repeated throughout the Bible.
Yeah.
God makes covenants with Noah, with Abraham, with the people of Israel.
Right.
Each covenant deepens our understanding of God's character.
Absolutely.
And his plan for redemption.
Yes. And what's so powerful is that these covenants aren't just ancient contracts. They point to God's ongoing relationship with humanity. His faithfulness despite our brokenness, and his unwavering commitment to restore all things.
It's like a love story that unfolds across generations.
Yes.
With God constantly pursuing us.
Yeah.
Even when we turn away from him.
Exactly. It's a story of relentless love.
Wow.
Of a God who never gives up on his creation.
Right.
And ultimately, the fulfillment of these covenants is found in Jesus Christ. He is the new Adam. The one who restores our relationship with God and inaugurates the new creation.
So Genesis isn't just the beginning of the Bible. It's the beginning of God's grand plan for redemption.
Exactly.
A plan that finds its ultimate expression in the person and work of Jesus Christ.
That's beautifully put.
Is it?
And that's the good news that resonates throughout the Christian faith. We are part of a story that began in Genesis and continues to unfold today. We are invited to participate in God's work of restoration, to be agents of his grace and love in the world.
This deep dive into Genesis has been truly enlightening.
Good. I'm glad.
We've seen how this ancient text speaks to both our intellect and our imagination.
Yeah.
Challenging us to think deeply about God creation.
Right.
And our place in the grand scheme of things.
And it's amazing how these different sources, with their diverse perspectives, have helped us gain a richer understanding of Genesis and its profound implications for the Christian faith. It's like we've pieced together a multifaceted mosaic, revealing a picture that's both beautiful and complex.
You know, one of the things that really stand out to me is this idea that Genesis is a book of beginnings. It's the beginning of creation, the beginning of humanity, the beginning of God's covenant with his people.
That's such an important observation.
It is.
And that's what makes it so relevant for us today. It reminds us that even in the midst of a world that often feels broken and chaotic, God is still at work. He's bringing new life, restoring relationships, and inviting us to participate in his ongoing story of redemption.
It's like we're standing at the threshold of something vast and mysterious with Genesis as our guide.
And that sense of possibility, that invitation to explore the unknown, is what makes this deep dive so compelling.
It is.
It's not just about accumulating knowledge, it's about embarking on a journey of discovery. A quest for truth that will continue long after this conversation ends. Speaking of journeys, there's one more fascinating theme that runs throughout these sources, the idea of exile and return.
Exile and return. That's interesting.
I
hadn't really thought about Genesis in that way before.
It's a theme that's woven throughout the book. You see it with Adam and Eve being exiled from the Garden of Eden, Cain being exiled after murdering Abel, and later the Israelites being exiled from their homeland. But in each case, there's a glimmer of hope, a promise of eventual return.
It makes you think about how we all experience moments of exile in our own lives. Times when we feel separated, lost, or alienated from God, from others, or even from ourselves.
That's such a profound insight.
Is it?
And Genesis reminds us that even in those dark places, even when we feel like we've wandered far from home, God is present.
That's comforting.
He's working to bring us back to himself. To restore what has been broken, to lead us back to that place of belonging and wholeness.
It's like we're all on a journey back to the garden. Back to that state of perfect communion with God and creation.
Exactly.
But it's a journey with twists and turns.
It is.
With moments of joy and moments of struggle.
It's not always a smooth path. It's marked by challenges, temptations, and setbacks. But Genesis reminds us that we're not alone on this journey.
That's good.
God is with us every step of the way. Guiding us, strengthening us, and leading us towards our ultimate destination.
And that destination is?
Home. A home in God's presence. A place of peace and joy that will never end.
Wow, that's a beautiful image.
I think so.
It makes me think about how the book of Genesis, despite being filled with ancient stories, still speaks to us in such powerful ways.
It's true. And one of the reasons it resonates so deeply is because of its powerful storytelling.
I can see that.
The creation account, the Garden of Eden, the stories of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah's Ark. These are narratives that have captivated the human imagination for thousands of years.
Stories have a way of getting past our defenses. Of touching our hearts and minds in ways that abstract concepts often can't. And in the case of Genesis, these stories aren't just entertaining.
No.
They're formative. They shape our understanding of who God is, who we are, and what it means to live a truly human life.
It's fascinating how Genesis uses symbolic language and imagery to communicate these profound truths. The Garden of Eden, for example, can be seen as a symbol of paradise lost, a reminder of our broken relationship with God and creation. The serpent can represent temptation and deception. The forces that lead us away from God's will.
Interesting.
And the tree of knowledge of good and evil points to our desire to define our own reality, to become like God rather than submitting to his authority.
It's like these symbols tap into something universal.
They do.
Something that resonates across cultures and time periods.
Yeah.
They speak to the deepest longings and fears of the human heart.
And that's where the real beauty of Genesis lies.
Where's that?
It's a text that invites us to engage with it on multiple levels.
Okay.
To explore its layers of meaning.
Right.
And discover new insights that can transform our lives.
You know, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We've explored different interpretations of the creation account.
Right.
The meaning of being made in God's image. The nature of original sin. the promise of redemption through Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And the concept of covenant.
Absolutely.
But I think what truly matters is how these stories shape our own lives.
Right.
How do they impact our understanding of God?
Sure.
How do they inform our relationships with others and with the world around us?
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
Genesis isn't just a book to be studied. It's a book to be lived.
Yeah.
It's a call to action, an invitation to participate in God's ongoing work of creation and redemption.
Right.
It's a challenge to be agents of his love, grace, and justice in a world that so desperately needs them.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Genesis, I want to leave our listener with this thought. If Genesis is the beginning of the story, what's your role in how it unfolds?
Right.
How will you live out the truths embedded in these ancient narratives?
Sure.
How will you reflect God's image in a world that is yearning for his love and healing?
Those are powerful questions to ponder.
I hope so.
Genesis reminds us that we're not just passive observers in this grand cosmic drama.
Yeah.
We're active participants in God's story. We have a choice to make each and every day. Will we embrace the call to be stewards of creation?
Yeah.
To love our neighbors and to seek justice for all?
Right.
Or will we succumb to the temptations that lead to brokenness, separation, and despair?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the book of Genesis.
You're very welcome.
It's been an incredible journey of discovery.
I'm glad.
We hope it sparked something within you, a desire to engage with these ancient stories and discover their timeless relevance for your own life.
And may the God of creation, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who spoke the world into being and who continues to work for its redemption, bless you and guide you on your journey.